This webinar is growing out of our work that we in Land for Good have done to write a comprehensive guide about how to buy a farm. And it's entitled How to Buy a Farm, a Guide for Farmers. And we're really hopeful that the webinar and the guide together will enable farmers of all backgrounds and all farming types to have less stress and more success in finding and buying farms. And we believe that's really important because owning your own farm can really give you security, long-term tenure, deep community connections, and the ability to regenerate your soils in really important ways. And we think that's super important for our food and farming system in the United States. We also wrote this guide, by the way, for service providers, and I know there are a number of service providers on this call. We know that you are helping farmers with their farmland tenure search and their farmland access search, and we want to help you as well. The first session in this webinar was all about how to find a property and some very basics of the purchase process. The second webinar was about some alternative ways of buying a farm that you might not have heard of. And today we're going to be looking and learning about the service providers that you will likely rely on in buying a farm, including a real estate agent, a lender, and an attorney. Each will have about 20 minutes for their presentation. I'm deeply grateful, by the way, for our presenters, Nathan, Edward, and Sarah, for making time in their very busy professional schedules to really carve out some time. They all have deep connections to agriculture, and they also have a really strong commitment to serving people. And so it's been really great to work with them in preparation for this. A few notes about today's webinar. Please do mute your video and audio so we have not too many distractions and as much bandwidth as possible. For asking any questions, please use the chat function. Just put your question in. If we have a lot of questions, we may have to select the ones that have the most interest for everybody, but we'll do our very best to use those as best as possible in the Q&A process. We are recording this. The recordings will be made available through an email that we send to all the registrants, so don't worry about that. That's definitely going to be happening. The webinar will close officially at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, but we will have about 10 more minutes of Q&A after that in case you want to hang around and ask a few more questions. We also urge everyone to be respectful and compassionate to the speakers and to other attendees. I know you will be, but we just want to offer that reminder. With that, we're going to begin with our first speaker, our first service provider, Nathan Gudmunson of the Coldwell Bank Real Estate Group. We're actually going to do an interview, so this is going to be like a video podcast for a very short period of time. Nathan, thank you so much for joining us and for being part of this webinar.
Well, Nathan, thank you for having me.
Sure. You have a great name, by the way. Let's see here. Please introduce yourself briefly and your connection to both farming and real estate.
Yeah, so I'm Nathan Gudmunson. I live about 65 miles west of Chicago, southern DeKalb County. Just little town of Somnock, rural community. I'm third generation to grow up here, and yeah, that's usually where you kind of start your roots on the farm. That's where you stay, and that's where I've continued on, living on my own farm. And then in 2019, I got my real estate license. Basically started working residential, didn't know where to start really, but it's kind of led me just from my background into, rural properties. I would say rural properties are around 70% of my annual sales.
Got it. Thank you. Can you please share some thoughts about the differences between buying residential property versus sort of ag properties?
Well, it's the same principles, location, and it always comes down to what's the buyer looking for. So, you have some people that need a ranch house, or some people that need a 2-story or a condo, or less maintenance, more maintenance, fixer-uppers. Farms with buildings are the same way. You can find some out there that are perfect. They don't need much, perfect location. You know, it again, it just depends on what's going to serve the buyer. If they're looking to try to market some things off their farm, traffic, that's going to be an important one. Can they get people passing by to help promote sale of their products?
Mm, excellent. So what should someone look for when they're looking for a farmland, when they're looking for farmland to buy and they're looking for a real estate agent to help them? What should they look for in that real estate agent?
Well, patience, knowledge, um, uh, yeah, patience and knowledge, I guess, is the biggest thing. There, I guess where I become, um, I guess, successful with real estate is I know the farm like the back of my hand. I'm third generation. I started farming my first piece of ground when I was 16, so I'm 45 now. Um, so there isn't. I am learning. I learn new things every day, but there's a lot that I know and feel like I can guide people um, in the right direction. But again, it just takes some time to really figure out exactly what's going to work best for the buyer. And me spending time with them and having conversations, um, yeah, we end up working together and find the perfect place for them.
Is there a way to tell whether your agent is going to have that patience and that time available to really to work with you?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I feel like it's no different than going to any place where you want to get work done. It could be the bank, not at Compeer. Everybody's perfect at Compeer. I want to throw that out there, but um, uh, any place you go, you come across different personalities, and I guess you get good vibes and bad vibes, and
Mm.
you got to go with who you're comfortable with, and that's the biggest thing. If the buyer's not comfortable, they're going to be hesitant on buying. And if they're not comfortable because they feel like their agent is pushy, um, if their agent doesn't have the knowledge, if they're those are all different things that are going to um, slow down a sale. So for me, it comes down to everybody's got to be comfortable with each other. And
Got it. So let's pretend, let's work through a scenario and you can kind of show all the different ways that you help a potential farm buyer. Let's pretend there's this couple, Henry and Lydia. They walk into your office on Monday morning and they tell you, we grow vegetables and diversified livestock, and we'd like to buy a farm with some farm infrastructure in your area. What would you start out with? How would you start talking to them? What would you explore with them?
I suppose at first I would just start asking some questions when they're talking vegetables. What kind of vegetables?
Mm,
Uh, where is their market for their vegetables?
mm,
That's going to be a couple of the big things. The other thing is the infrastructure for their diversified livestock. Or do they have? Is it chickens? Is it pigs? Is it cattle? Buffalo? I mean, there's all different. There's all different you know, chickens and pigs, they don't take up as much room. They don't take up as much area, uh, as much real estate.
got
You can
it.
put them in, smaller buildings. But if you're going to have cattle or any sort of large animal, that's going to take a little bit of pasture space, bigger buildings, uh, room for expansion, maybe to be able to have the vet come out to do checks like that. So again, it'd be just kind of having the conversation with them and and working through what they want to do, what their plan is.
So I think I know how you're going to answer this, but what would be the ideal situation when Henry and Lydia come in? What would you love for them to have already talked through and decided and know for how efficiently you can help them?
Well, I would love it if Henry and Lydia were basically had the same vision. That's going to be that can be kind of the biggest hurdle to jump sometimes is um, yes, they both want to be in the country. Lydia just wants chickens, but Henry wants to raise cattle. So, uh, having everybody on the same page, that's going to create, or the same vision, that's going to make everybody's job and
Mhm.
we're not, I don't want to say wasting time. I never think of real estate as wasting time. Anything that I get to look at, I always feel is educational to me.
Mhm.
And we maybe would have to look at some different places, but find that common ground, what works for both of them.
Got it. And as I understand it, when used to under the legal system we have, you're supposed to have some sort of representation agreement with potential buyers. How do you work that out, and what's your usual rate of commission?
Yeah, so and that just started about a little over a year and a half ago where it became mandatory across the nation, actually. So um, I can't say I was pretty nervous about it when it was starting. Um, it hasn't been a bad thing. It really hasn't changed my business. But one thing that I've done if with rural properties, I do get well, I'll just call it the random call. Hey, we see you've got this place listed and we'd like to come look at it. Well, I have to have a conversation with them about buyer representation and a contract to sign. Um, what's the first thing that's going to make them uncomfortable or make me seem like I don't know, locking them in with me only is to say, hey, 1 year, um, here's a 1 year contract buyer agency agreement that says you're going to work with me and me alone for the next year. So what I do with those, and it's a two-way street. I want to decide if it's going to be a good fit for me as well. Can I service the client? Do I have the knowledge to find what they're looking for? And the more time I spend with them, the more that's going to become clear. So what I do with people that buyers that call me to look at my new listing that just came on is I sign buyer representation for that property only. And I'll so it's that property only, and I'll put like maybe a 45-day on that property only. So um hey, they feel good about it. I feel good about it. If I do my job, maybe that property is not the right one for them. But if they want to continue to use me to look at some different properties, then we just update the contract.
Got it. And what about the commission rate? How do you figure that out?
So it, typically I'll start out at typically it's we'll start out at 2.5 or 3%. Again, that can be negotiable. There's a lot of factors that go into okay, is the area that they're looking for um, how close is it to my home base, or travel time, or is it a $250,000 property, or is it a $1 million property? So again, those are always negotiable. As far as where I'm at most of the time is, the 2.5 to 3%.
Got it. So what happens next? You have an idea of who they are, what they're looking for. You've kind of explained how you work. You've worked out a representation agreement. What do you do next?
So once we get the agreement worked out, we um, if we have some properties to go look at, uh, we start going and looking. And it it takes time. It takes time. It's very rare that someone comes in and buys the first property that they've ever looked at, especially in the country. And I really want to make them aware so I can sleep at night and so they can sleep at night that um, everybody knows what they're getting into. It's a different ball game once you're in the country. The snow shovel and the snow blower don't really work. You got to have a skid loader and a pickup truck with a plow or a resource to get. So there's just things like that I really want to make. Excuse me, make sure everybody is um, knows. I want to spend some time with them and explain rural living a little bit with them.
Got it. So I think you've mentioned to me already that because you know farming, you're able to sort of help them assess properties. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah. So when I pull into a place, my eyes are going to the buildings, to the roofs. Um, Instantly I'm looking at uh, the condition, right? Do they have steel roofs on them? Are they shingles? Wood shakes,
Mm.
still you see in some cases. Um, some slate siding, which that could have potentially asbestos in it. So I mean, there's just a lot of different things that I'm monitoring right out of the way, right when I'm pulling in. And then looking at different things like, um, do I see a wellhead that's sticking above ground, or after further investigation, is it a below grade well, which
Mm.
is not the end of the world. Um, but typically to be up to today's standards, your wellhead has to stick, above ground level. Um, Septic, another thing, uh, I believe in the 1970s, they kind of came up with more of a standard for septics. I can usually find the footprint of the septic by looking at the lay of the land and or looking where the output is from the basement and find the tank. And I would say 90% of the time see where those things are. Now, if I can see a footprint of a septic, about 440 linear feet, um, it's updated in my mind. Yeah, it might have been updated in the 80s, but so those are all different things I'm kind of looking at and assessing as far as that goes.
Got it. And do you also pay attention to, I mean, you also have a knowledge of the zoning and other factors that might also influence that property?
Yeah, I do get a lot of calls, and people will say, "Can you find me 5 acres in the country? I want to build a house." And that's pretty tough to do. In DeKalb County, for instance, you've got to have 40 acres, 40 buildable acres. Um, so if the original farmstead is there and your original farmstead is 5 acres. It's designated, even though they don't own it. There's a designation to some of the bare land around it. So there could be a 50 or 60, even a 75 acre piece. Well, not 75, but 50,
Mm.
55 plus 55 acres. Um, and if you have your portion of the buildings, whether it be 2, 5, or 10 acre piece that's already been sold off, but it's designated to some of the other bare land, it may not be, even though they're buying 40 acres, it might not be buildable.
Wow. 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 It's really important that the agent be aware of those different zoning and other restrictions.
Very much so. Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
And then what happens? So Henry and Lydia find a property with your help. They're like, wow, this seems like it's got what we need. It's in the general price range. What do you do next? What do you help them do next?
Well, I'm going to pull up comps. I'm going to pull comps of different comparables to just, um, and they're so different in the country, just like every house is different. I feel like there's even more diversity in the rural areas, between buildings and condition. And um, so what I'm going to try to do is find some like properties
Mm.
and like acreages, buildings, condition of house, um,
Yep.
try to see what some recent sales are. And at that point, um, you know, try to find that price. Probably backing up a step, make sure that ask them who their lender is. And uh, if there's a property that has some income producing capabilities on it, um, it's not available. The secondary market doesn't want to finance that. So you get very limited on who your lender can be. And I think that's shocking to a lot of people that you have to talk to a Compeer Financial. That's who I do all my lending with. That's who I send people to when we're looking at rural properties. That's who they're used to dealing with. Um, they know the difference between a barn and a pole barn and a chicken house, hog house, corn crib. Um,
Got it.
Grain bins,
Okay.
silos. So there's all those different things, but that's the most important thing is the lender. Do they
Got
have
it.
the right lender that's going to fit what they want to do? a company like Compeer or some of your local banks are more likely to lend and keep it in-house.
Couple of more minutes, Nathan.
Okay.
And then we have a
Okay.
couple of questions that I don't want to forget.
So, so talk to me about you make the offer through a purchase and sales agreement, and that usually has contingencies. Anything to pay attention, special to pay attention to in that process?
With the contingencies, not too much. It's basically just working through the process of they're going to do their home inspection and or building inspection. They can take that as to whatever scope they want to have inspected, the buyers, that is. After that, we're going to work through the appraisal process. And again, everybody kind of has their own job, but we're going to make sure that, the survey was done and that the well and the septic, they're always tested. Especially they have to be if it's financed. And that's typically a seller expense that the seller is basically guaranteeing that the well and the septic are in good shape, and that's very important. A septic field will cost anywhere from different styles, 15 to 25,000, and your well is probably right there in that same ballpark figure. So we want to make very sure that that well and septic are in good shape. Otherwise, that needs to be negotiated, before closing.
So, maybe two last questions. One question. Any experiences with the negotiation process that can be difficult, or like any stories of how that can work, kind of going back and forth with the other agent?
Yeah, negotiating it can be pretty tough. I feel like sometimes when there is, well, I call it blowing smoke. If I have an agent that I'm trying to work with and they maybe don't have as much ag background, and I feel like they're trying to sell me on that property, it, that's a little tough for me to, I don't know, sit and listen to it, I guess. I feel like I know buildings and I know farms and I know soil productivity index, and a lot of it's just working through the process based on it's just working through the process.
Got it.
With the
Got it.
negotiating.
So last question, any tips for farm buyers in the whole process, the emotional ups and downs, what you're going to learn that you didn't perhaps know when you began? Like, what are any final thoughts or tips for farm buyers?
Well, you got to trust your agent. That's the biggest thing. If there's a little bit of hesitation on trust, it isn't gonna work. I try to look at every transaction as, am I treating this person how I would treat family? And if I keep that in mind, and don't think about it as, ooh, how quick can I get these people under contract and get my paycheck? I never make it about that. And if I work with someone it takes a while, but sometimes it takes a couple years to find the right fit, but the right fit is worth the wait. So patience and get a good agent that you feel comfortable with.
What if you find out you first think you like the agent, but you sign a buyer representation agreement, but then you find out, you know what, this isn't a good match. How do you get out of that?
Well, you just have to notify him. You just notify him and you say, hey, this isn't working.
Okay.
Yes, the agent has to agree to that too, but I've never had a problem with that myself. I've never, maybe one time I had someone that, went a different direction, but I've had it probably more the other way, where I've had people that want someone with a little bit more ag background. And I think if they explain it to the agent, and I'm always willing to reach out to the other agent too and explain why, and if I need to work something out with them as far as a referral, there's a way to do that too. I'm not here to upset anybody. I'm here to try to keep everybody happy. We're all working together in the same area. So but
Awesome.
yes, just
Kathy, you
because
want,
you sign, you are not completely stuck there.
great,
Okay,
thank you.
so we've got a few very interesting questions. The first one is, Nathan, do you see differences in the efforts that agents put into actually searching for properties? Some agents are probably more proactive than others. What is the expectation that an agent will be aggressive in looking for properties?
Yeah, and I know silence is never a good thing. The patience part of it, when I'm looking for pieces of land, they're not always in the MLS.
Right.
Especially for bare land. So what I'm doing is reaching out to some of the different land companies. I'm following them to see what they have coming on market. Looking at local auctions. There's quite a bit of farmland that gets sold on auctions, and you know, sometimes there may not be an opportunity for me to represent a buyer at an auction, but if that's the best option and that's the best fit for the buyer, I'm going to lead them to that direction. If they want help and guidance through that, then I can do that. But again, it kind of, does that answering the question? Am I answering the question okay?
I think so. I mean, I think it's every realtor maybe approaches it a little bit differently in terms of, I imagine there's some realtors, especially those who are not familiar with what you call rural properties or farm properties, who are not going to know to look in the publications that you're looking at and to look
Right.
at auctions. So again, it's a conversation that the buyers and the agent have to have together about what the expectations are.
I'm not afraid to pick up the phone and talk to people. And I mean, I enjoy it. So if I've got someone that's looking in a specific area, and I know that there's someone that lists quite a bit of land in that area or farmettes, hey, I'm getting in touch with them, say, hey, I've got a buyer looking for this. Keep me in mind. Again, it might take a while, but usually I'm trying to look at every effort to find them what they're looking for.
You
Every
know,
avenue.
I really appreciate that. And there's a comment, how do I find a realtor like you in Massachusetts? And I think, I mean, there's a ha-ha next to that, but I think that the extent to which realtors are familiar with and interested in farm properties or rural properties varies widely. And I think the success that or frustration that some farm buyers feel is because of that wide range of knowledge and interest. So another question that came up is, what are some of the zoning restrictions to be aware of? For example, if I am looking in a residential zone for, sort of smaller scale or home-based production. Talk a little bit about how realtors will help with looking at zoning.
So basically, when you're saying a residential, would that be like a rural residential type property? In DeKalb County, where I'm at, um, there isn't very many rural subdivisions. So DeKalb County's had zoning laws in place probably since the 70s or mid 70s, which was good. It helped to preserve the good farmland that we have. LaSalle County, you can find them a little bit more where you will have some subdivisions within the county. Then it'll kind of come down to basically local ordinances and/or if there's any restrictions or covenants within that subdivision. It might be a 3 or 4 acre lot, and I do see those, and they might say you can't have cattle, you can't have pigs, but you could have goats, chickens, and sheep. So you have to
Right.
kind of look at local covenants as
Right.
far if that's what they're looking for.
Yeah, and I think that what you're describing is also going to really vary by region. Um,
Correct.
Oftentimes, people are looking at residential zoning for a small farm property, and if your realtor doesn't look at the zoning regulations, then certainly the buyer should be doing all that due diligence, which we describe in our guide, because zoning, it may be the deal breaker in some cases.
Yeah,
All right.
exactly.
One more question. You talked a little bit about inspection, and the question is about soil health. Is that typically part of the inspection, or should it be?
Well, I guess if I usually I'm doing a little digging into the background of the property. If I know that it's just been a property that has been cropland, yeah, maybe I'm getting soil samples, but that's not really if we're looking for like a hazardous material, we don't typically do that. Now, if there was, hey, we know that there used to be a junkyard in this area, or a dump in the area, yeah, I would recommend digging a little bit deeper at that point and trying to get do some environmental testing to make sure that they're not taking on someone else's problem.
So it would be likely that you might suggest that the prospective buyers do that also on their list of due diligence, but it would not be up to the real estate professional to do that. We got one more question coming in. Let's see if we can answer it in 30 seconds. No, that's okay. I think we're good.
All right,
There's a
Nathan.
question. Let me just say, wait a minute. Do realtors assist with lease purchases? Kathy, could you explain a little bit more what you're asking? Does that mean a lease to own situation?
Yes, basically, because I was actually speaking to a realtor right now, and he was basically disavowing me of lease purchases that, oh, they're very, very rare, and we don't do that, and this and that and the third. So I just figured I would ask a realtor directly, is that true that lease purchases, I mean, I know they happen, but is it a rarity that they occur and that realtors don't really handle those? So like if I went to my realtor and I said, hey, I would like to potentially look at, I mean, I want to buy land, but I want to be in the best position for like an FSA loan. Is it possible for me to, and I understand I can't do owner financing up front. I learned because then I won't be able to do what I need to do. I can't do a refinance, but is it possible to have, talk to someone who might be interested in letting us lease until we're ready to purchase? So I was just curious, is that something that a realtor is in their purview to ask or, advocate for?
Absolutely. I mean, it probably will come down to compensation a little bit and what the particular realtor is willing to do as far as, hey, are they just going to help you out and point you in the right direction? Or so are they going to work for you to try to handle the complete transaction? And the uncomfortable thing in the room is, well, who's going to pay for it? So is that going to be a compensation that's set up between you and your realtor, or are you going to ask the landowner to kind of split that? That's going to be probably the biggest thing. There's a lot of realtors that it's their job, and most people like to get paid after they do a job. But do I see them very often? You hear about them some, but it's not very often that you see like a lease to own or a rent to own on farmland.
Lease to own is not super common, but we have experience with those, and it's a very attractive process for lots of farmers who are not in the position to buy straight out. And again,
Right.
Nathan and I will refer you to our guide because we do talk about that as a method. Thank you, Nathan. And I'm going to pass it back to the other Nathan to introduce our next presenter.
Excellent. Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Nathan. So our
Thank you.
next presenter is Sarah Hoerner of Compeer, which is a farm credit organization. Sarah, through her role there, assists non-traditional agricultural operations that sell their products directly to consumers. This includes urban agriculture, value-added production, and non-traditional ag operations like fruits, vegetables, and flowers. As the sixth generation on her own family's farm, she has a deep connection to agriculture. She currently cultivates conventional corn and soybeans alongside her dad and uncle. She also has an active role in the Illinois Farm Bureau. She's had a wealth of experience in a variety of jobs and careers, including being an agriculture lender at a local Illinois bank. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. And as much as I practiced the sharing, I think I messed it up again. Let's see if I got it. Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Good. Okay. All right. So I'm located in Pontiac, Illinois, so just a little bit further south from Nate there. And thank you for the ringing endorsement for Compeer. I don't know who you work with, but I'll let them know that you spoke very highly of us and they're doing a good job. So like you said, I'm with the emerging markets team. And we cover the northern half of Illinois into Wisconsin and then the eastern half of Minnesota, and then all along the Iowa border is what Compeer Financial covers. But the farm credit system has nationwide locations. So I saw somebody from Worcester here. There is one that covers New England, and they are very familiar with specialty growers. So if you have specialty growers, or if that's what you're doing, give them a call. They might be able to help you find that ground. I know you mentioned it's very expensive in Massachusetts, but you never know who they know. So I would go that route. Okay, this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to cover some basic information about farm loans and real estate loans, residential versus agriculture. What's the difference? I think a lot of us are familiar with the residential side of things. So I'm going to try to get us to the I'm also going to shut off my camera because I talk with my hands and I don't want you guys to see them. So I'm going to tell you the difference. We're going to briefly go over the 5 C's of credit. We can go back to it, but because of time, I'm going to put it in there for you guys to read later. And we're going to talk about getting ready to apply for that farm loan and closing on it, and then your farming options. And I've already heard somebody mention the FSA. I left that for the last part, but I'm going to get through it because I feel like that's going to be where a lot of you are going to have questions. So there's 3 types of farm loans. You have the operating loans, which are for your operating expenses, like a line of credit. You have your intermediate ones, which are usually 3 to 7 years. Then you have your long-term loans, and I have that highlighted because that's where we're going to focus today. So let's talk about long-term farm loans. They're used to purchase real estate, basically, anything that's going to last a long time, construction of buildings, that sort of thing. The loans can be up to 30 years. With scheduled principal and interest payments. On the ag side of loans, we can make those payments monthly, quarterly, semi-annual, or annual. The nice thing about that is on the ag side is we recognize that agriculture is seasonal, right? So as a corn and soybean farmer, I would like my payments due in November, December, or January, because that's when I have income, right? I harvest in October, and that's when I know I have income. For my specialty growers, I usually have them due in September, October, or November. It's kind of whenever they say, hey, I have enough money, we're going to do this. The other thing is they can be fixed interest rate or an adjustable rate. The most common one I see on the adjustable rate side is where every 5 years your interest rate could change, but the payments are amortized out over 30 years. So that means your payments are spread out 30 years, but your interest rate can change. So every 5 years your payment could change too. Let's talk about farm loans versus residential. Farm loans are commercial loans. They're not consumer loans. Farm real estate loans generally can't be sold on the secondary market, Fannie or Freddie. There are some cases where if you get an FSA guarantee, you can sell those on the secondary market, but we'll get into that on the FSA side of things. And also some banks and credit unions won't finance farms. They consider them high risk. I think the most surprising one that people don't know about, if you're from Illinois, there's Busey Bank down in Champaign. Last I heard, they'll do farm loans as far as land, but they don't do like operating loans, right? So that's why some of them don't get into it. They don't have the expertise in it either. Like I mentioned, a lot of banks will only offer 3 or 5 year adjustable rate mortgages for farms. And the farm credit system, that's kind of what we're known for, is we can do fixed rates over long terms. A lot of these banks will use the FSA to be able to get you that 30-year fixed. The interest rates tend to be a little bit higher than residential. Not always, but I would just be prepared for that. Also, residential is highly regulated, and they cannot take future cash flows into consideration. So what do I mean by that? I mean, they have certain disclosures they have to sign. There's certain timings of everything. If you want those timings to change, then you have to sign a form and then you have to give that form with this. I don't have that on the ag side. I consider them accountants. They have to look at certain things, whereas we are more, or they're, we're more, or like, they're like scientists. They look at certain things. We are artists. In other words, we can kind of look at the picture, whether it's in the future or the present, or kind of change the picture a little bit using the financials. Okay. And then residential loans or consumer loans are normally monthly payment, which again for farmers can be very hard. I put this chart together this morning actually, and I don't normally, when I do these presentations, I recognize that the farm credit system is not everybody's cup of tea. And so I don't normally put Compeer stuff in it per se, but I wanted to today. So pre-approvals, residential side, you can get them. On the ag real estate side, it depends on the lender. For us, we don't do pre-approvals on the ag side. What we have is pre-qualifications, and it's basically a letter that says pending appraisal, pending FSA financing, pending financial. It's basically just something you can hand to your real estate agent, or so that they can then negotiate on your behalf. And then that seller knows that you're already working with a lender and are serious about the purchase. Consider future earnings. We've been over that. Signed contract. Everybody's got signed contracts. Closing dates. Usually it's 30 days on the residential side. On the ag real estate side, it can be 30 days, especially if you buy the land on auction, it's usually within 30 days. But if you're using an FSA loan, you need to plan with right now with them going back to work and all they're catching up on, I'd say it's 60 to 90. I know Minnesota earlier this year with everybody taking buyouts, it was 90 to 120 days. So, and every state is different on that turnaround time. So that's something that you're going to need to talk to your local office about. But when you are signing that contract, you need to be very aware of that. Also, we're going to talk about this later. You cannot get pre-approval from the FSA. So if it's pending FSA financing, you might need to put that in the contract. That's something that Ed can talk about after I'm done. Private mortgage insurance. If your loan to value on your real estate purchase is too high on the residential side, the bank could ask you to have private mortgage insurance. And I'll tell you that mine was like that. My first purchase was a condo, which I'm sitting in, and I had to have private mortgage insurance. And it basically says this is a higher risk loan, therefore we're going to insure it. Then there's escrow. Escrow is used to save for like property taxes and HOA fees and your residential insurance. And basically the bank pays all of those on your behalf. You put money in there every month along with your principal and interest. They save it for you. They write those checks for you and they make sure it's getting paid. Escrow again is a thing like PMI, whereas if your loan to value gets below a certain amount, you might be able to have that removed. A lot of banks require it. Ag real estate, we don't have that. And I found out today that Compeer Home Division doesn't have that at all. So we don't have PMI or require escrow. Again, that's not every farm credit, but that is us. Flood insurance. If you're in a flood zone, you're going to have to get flood insurance, and it could be pricey. So be very aware of what you're buying and if it's in a flood zone. And this comes into play if there are buildings. So if you're in a flood zone and there are buildings, you may have to pay extra for insurance, and it could be not that expensive to kind of pricey. So just be aware of what you're buying ahead of time. Down payments. Residential, you're probably going to need a little bit of a down payment or extra collateral somewhere. Same on the ag side, but for Compeer, it's different. So for our first-time home buyers on the Compeer home side, we have a product in which you don't have to put anything down. For our young beginning small farmers, we just released, it's called Farm Forward, but we just released a program where it mimics the beginning farmer down payment loan program through the FSA. And that is 1% to 10%. Again, we have association lines and not every association has that, but I wanted to throw that in there because I didn't realize how different we are on some of these things. So appraisal, everybody's going to need an appraisal. Title work, everybody's going to need title. This tells us that the people that own it actually own it. Or if there's an easement, I heard of a closing just yesterday and my mom was involved with it at her law office, where they didn't know there was an easement for some water line to go through, and then that had to get fixed. And so that tells you if there's a mortgage out there, it tells you who owns it, it tells you if there's any easement there, right? And then there's title insurance that you have to pay for during closing to ensure. Basically, that's telling the lender that if the title company didn't do what they're supposed to do and somebody comes up and says, I actually own this, title company is liable for that, and that's why we have insurance with them. Then I found out about title endorsements as I was talking to one of our residential insurance people, and this is something the residential real estate agents are going to be way more familiar with than I am. And there's endorsements such as EPA, and I can't remember the other one she mentioned, but I don't know of them, so I don't think we have them on the ag side so much. Compeer Home has them. On the ag side of it, we don't have those. Closing fees, everybody's going to have closing fees. So ag real estate is truly a little bit different than residential. Okay, let's talk about preparing for a farm loan. You need to build and maintain a credit score of 670 or above. If you're below that, it doesn't eliminate you from consideration, but it makes it considerably harder. As a lender, if you're below that mark, sometimes I got to jump through hoops, right? Or that's where you may need the FSA. That's where ag lenders will use the FSA to help with that risk. So if your credit score is lower, a lot of times the only way an ag lender will be able to do the loan is if they have FSA backing with it. This is a big one. Pay down credit cards and student loan debts to achieve positive net worth. We look at balance sheets. This is the first thing I look at every time. And student loans are just unique because you have them on the liability side, but there's no value to the diploma on the asset side. Trust me, I have student loans and I wish there was. So with that, we take student loans with a grain of salt, but make sure you're paying those on time because that'll factor into your FICO score. And then the credit cards is where I'm more concerned than the student debts. As long as you're paying your student loans on time, you're okay. Credit cards can get out of hand really quickly. They're high interest, very high interest. They get reported every month to your credit bureaus, and the fees can get high too. And so it just kind of snowballs. So keep an eye on that credit card debt. And that's something that as lenders, we're concerned, like what is in that credit card debt? So even though you're paying your bills, are you paying them with credit cards, right? Also, if you're starting a farm, file a Schedule F as soon as possible. This is very important for FSA qualification. It is the easiest way for an FSA loan officer to say, hey, you're qualified. A Schedule F is what we file with our tax returns, and it's our income and expenses for the farm, okay? And I know I have some people that are like, oh, I'm cash only. I don't want the government to pay. I don't want to pay the government. Pay them a little bit, because if you pay them a little bit, it means you're making money, and you're also showing any lender in the future that like, hey, I do my accounting books. I file taxes like any other farmer. This is the biggest one. You got to build up your cash reserves and prepare for a down payment. It is incredibly common for me that I will get a call from a young farmer wanting to purchase ground. And even with the FSA loans, you have to put something down. And there's nothing to put down. There's no extra collateral. There's nothing. Have a separate account for that down payment because you're going to need it. You have closing fees you're going to have to pay for, but that down payment, I've seen that down payment crash a lot of deals. Basically, it just stops because you have to put something down on it. If you're going to have an in-house loan at a bank or with Farm Credit, they're most likely going to need 20 to 30% down because they're taking all the risks. So they want you to have some skin in the game, right? We'll go over some loan options where it's not quite as much, but if you're looking at an in-house loan with a bank, no FSA or anything like that, you're looking at 20 to 30%. So then the next thing is, having a history of paying loans on time is a really good idea. So if you have a farm, had to get water there. It might be a good idea to start an operating loan to start a history of paying loans and that you can handle having loans and everything. So don't be afraid to, if you're buying a tractor, if you're a little farm that you then want to expand, take out a loan on it, even if you can pay cash on it, just to start that history and build that relationship with that lender. It's not a bad idea. If you can handle debt, it's not a bad idea. If you have trouble with debt, maybe don't, because it could look bad, but I highly recommend at least looking at creating that relationship and building it. And also non-farm income is a strength. It is a huge strength because there's a lot of risk in farming, whether markets, especially if you're direct consumer, we can't exactly predict what your income is going to be. If you have a non-farm job that's going to pay for health insurance, dentist, all that stuff, your groceries, then we know the farm isn't paying for all that and can help pay for the loan. So this is what we're going to need for your application. So again, this depends on the lender, depends on the size of the loan, and the type of loan. So what I ask for is the past, present, and the future. I want 2 to 3 years of tax returns. I usually ask for 2, but the FSA can ask for 3. Present would be your balance sheet. I want to know where your assets are and your liabilities. And then the future is I want to know what your plans are. So I want a projected profit and loss statement or cash flow projection. I'm going to need that for your personal income. So non-farm income plus your family living. So again, that's like your groceries, your student loan debt, anything that's not farm. And then I'm going to need it for the farm as well. And then I usually ask for a very simple business plan. And I wanted to put a little asterisk on this one over simple, like make sure it is simple. Most lenders, if you hand them a 30 to 40 page business plan, they're not going to sit there and read a 30 to 40 page business plan. A simple business plan, I would say, is less than 5 pages. And if you really want to get everything and know they read it, I would keep it less than 3 pages. They're not going to sit there and read a whole book on it. What I want to see as a lender is that you've thought of the important things. And I have a questionnaire that I hand out to farmers rather than having them write it. I want to know that you've thought of everything or thought of most things, and that you have a plan in place. What I don't want to see is that you have planned every single inch and detail of your farm, because things never go as planned. And it also tells me that you've spent a lot of time planning, not necessarily doing. So make sure that business plan is kept simple and very readable, because if it's hard to read, they're not going to go very far into it. The lender won't. So let's say you got the loan. Now what are you going to do? So your lender's going to order an appraisal. And one of the most common questions I get is, can we order the appraisal before I put the offer in? I mean, you can. I wouldn't though, because if you don't get the loan, you still owe those appraisal fees. And those appraisal fees, I think most of the land ones I've been doing recently, and we have in-house appraisers, has been about $1,600. Then you're going to have to pay a fee to that appraiser to put another lender's name on it. So we need the appraisal in our name. And so then you could be looking at $2,000. And if you don't get the loan or something falls through, you still might be looking at $2,000. So you can look up on websites. I think it's Value Acre or Acre Value kind of gives you an estimate of what they think it's worth, but I would not get the appraisal ahead of time. And then on top of that, you're going to need the permission of the seller too. And sometimes if it's family, they'll do it ahead of time, but I would just wait. You're going to need title work. We talked about that. You pay for the title work, and that's the part of the closing costs. You have the appraisal fees, the recording fees, the title fees, lawyer fees. Lawyers are worth it. We're going to talk about that later. And then there might be some taxes involved where the seller pays certain amount of taxes, or they've paid last year's, or they might still owe. It just depends on the closing and the settlement, how that's all worked out. Okay, so this is the part I'm going to breeze over really fast, so I can get to the FSA, because I only have about 4 minutes. These are the 5 C's of credit. You can find these online, but I'll also give Nathan this presentation to give you guys, but this is what we use to make decisions, okay? In some way or form, we hit all 5 of these C's, okay? All right, so let's talk about lenders' options. So you have us, the Nationwide Farm Credit System. You have commercial banks. There's some very good community banks that can serve urban ag and specialty growers. You have some credit unions, but the main thing is, if you're purchasing a farm, find an ag lender. If you find a residential lender and you're trying to do ag, they could try to fit you in a box that that's not your box. You're a farmer. You need to find an ag lender, someone that understands what you're doing. There's some private for-profit lenders. These are mainly in Illinois and Wisconsin, Minnesota. So if you're outside of the region, just note that not all these are nationwide. The one thing I would say is make sure they're likely to be around for a long time. And then also always be extra cautious when working with a non-regulated lender. We have regulations on the farm credit side, which we're a co-op, not a bank, but there's also regulations on the banking side. So just do your homework if you're going to use a private or a nonprofit lender. All right, now for the main event, and I'm going to try to get through this. And if we need to spend more time with this and questions, that's fine. So there's 2 types of loans that the FSA offer. They offer direct loans, and then they offer loan guarantees, okay? The direct loans, if you're going to have 100% FSA financing, at least in Illinois, they're going to look at it a lot closer. Okay. And I mean, they're going to look at it because they're the ones taking on 100% of the risk. If they have a lending partner, such as Compeer or a bank, they're going to look at it closely, but they know there's a second set of eyes on it, and that matters to them. Okay. The most common loan that I hear about is the beginning farmer loan. We call it the 54550. It's 5% down, 45% FSA direct loan up to $300,150. That's spread, those payments are spread out over 20 years, and the interest rate as of, well, it's actually last night, is 1.75%. So that's a really good deal. Then you need a lender such as myself to cover the other half of that. And so we spread those out over usually 30 years. Rates can vary, but you can save on interest if we get an FSA guarantee, which if we're going to do a direct loan, I'll go through those hoops. We can go through the FSA guarantee pretty easily and save you about 0.5% on interest, which is not bad. What you need for FSA loans is you need 3 years or more of farming. This beginning farmer loan is good for 10 years or less. They used to have socially disadvantaged extension for that. I don't know if they have those anymore. Last I heard, they were getting rid of them. I don't know if they're actually in the courts or where they're at with them. I figured if I ever had somebody that was on that line, I would address it when it came down because so much has changed since the beginning of the year, and I can't keep track of it all. So if you're socially disadvantaged farmer, which the NRCS and the FSA have two different definitions of socially disadvantaged, you might be able to go past 10 years, but I can't guarantee it because the current administration, I think, got rid of it. So if you don't qualify for that beginning farmer loan, there's a 50-50. And they usually ask for like 5% or 10% down. And then they cover half of it up to $600,000. That rate as of last night was 3.75%. We cover the other half. And again, we get a guarantee on that to save you a little bit of interest. If you have a big purchase, this is something that's fairly new to the FSA. They used to have it where one purchase could only use one program. Now we can use multiple programs. So if you have a loan that's well over like into the 7 figures, and that you can use the FSA down payment program up to $300,150, then you can use the rest of your FSA money in a 50-50. So you could end up with 2 different direct FSA loans and then one with a lender. But that's nice that they're letting you use multiple programs now. The loans are not for, the loans are for people who need it. So if you have a very high net worth, your income is good, and you're just wanting that low interest rate, at least in Illinois, a lot of the loan officers are going to look at it and say, absolutely not. Because everybody pulls from the same, bucket of money, basically, throughout the country. And so if you are really good financially, the FSA is not, how do I put this? It's not there for you. It's for someone who has trouble getting commercial credit. And again, with the 20 to 30% down, it's hard to get commercial credit.
Sarah, we're going to need to wrap up. How many more slides do you have? Maybe we could save them for the very end.
About 4 or 5, but they're mainly FSA. And I feel like that's where a lot of the questions are going to be. So let me get through the FSA things, Kathy, and then we'll wrap up real quick. So I feel like that's where most of the questions are going to be. So give me a couple more slides and we'll be good. So the loan guarantees, the way those work is, and you can do refinances with loan guarantees. You cannot do refi with direct loans. If I have a $100,000 loan and I have a loan guarantee, basically we only have 10% of that risk, and then the FSA guarantees the rest. There is a fee with that. Some things to consider. There is no pre-approval for direct or guaranteed loans. There's no refinancing with FSA direct loan. If the only way a young farmer can afford to buy land with the FSA's help, they do not know if they're approved at the time of an auction. Keep that in mind. You need to know if the seller is willing to wait to close past the 30 days. And if you don't have enough experience, they may require you to take a farm management class. You have to have that 3 years of farming. The FSA will want the farm to pay for a majority, if not all, the land purchase. At least in Illinois, that is the rule. So if you're planning on your off-farm job paying for a majority of the purchase, a lot of them will say that's investor. We're not interested in that, okay? All applicants must qualify. So if you're planning on your buddy going in on a purchase with you and he doesn't have the qualifications needed, he cannot get an FSA loan, okay? And everybody has to qualify. A majority of the land must be farmable. I don't know if that's a word, but I made it a word. So if you have 40 acres and only 10 acres is farmable, the rest is timber, they're not going to be able to do that. This is a big one. They're not in the residential business, so it must be a modest dwelling, and that is purposely vague so that they can decide if it's modest. If you're wanting to build a house, you have to jump through a lot of hoops if the FSA financed that ground. And the last one I heard took 8 months to get their approval. So if you call them and say, I got a contractor coming in 4 months, they're not guaranteed to say yes to you doing it. And if they do, it can take a long time. You can do land contracts where, the current sellers, it's between you and the current seller, and you have a contract, you pay them a little at a time. Make sure you file that paperwork with the county so that if something happens to the sellers, that the heirs know that you have a signed contract with them. And also family and friends, if they can pledge any collateral, that happens with the FSA quite a bit where you need that as well. Or if they can loan you money for a down payment, that happens too. I'm going to lead into Ed here. And do you need an attorney? Yes. I have so many farmers that want to avoid the attorney, and I don't know why. This is the biggest purchase you might make in your lifetime. Make sure you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, especially when there's a contract, because like my mom works for a lawyer's office. She always wants pending financing in there. If your financing is not guaranteed, especially if you're going through the FSA, you need an attorney. You need to make sure you're covered and that you have an exit strategy if the appraisal comes back and it's not a favorable appraisal. So definitely get an attorney. Thank you, Kathy. I rushed through that, but I wanted to get through the FSA stuff because that's where a lot of the questions are. So felt like that wasn't too bad, but we'll move on from there. So
okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. I will, I've collected the questions that were directed to you. We're gonna tack those on at the end, and we'll move on to Ed right now, and we'll circle around. So back to you, Nathan.
Let me
all right, Sarah, thank you so much. So just, I saw a question about Sarah's slide deck. We plan to share all the slide decks we can at the end of this whole series. So Sarah, if you don't mind sending to me, that'd be great. Sure. We're now going to move to the attorney side of things. And we're fortunate to have Ed Cox of Cox Law, LLP. And Ed has been in the private practice representing clients with estate planning, probate, and a variety of agricultural law matters since moving to Centerville, Iowa in 2014. Prior to private practice, he worked at the Drake Agricultural Law Center on land tenure and farm leasing matters, as well as beginning farmer and veteran farmer policies and programs. He attended Missouri State and obtained his JD from Drake University Law School with a certificate in food and agricultural law. He has published and given many presentations on agricultural law and conservation. Ed, we appreciate you being here. Can you go ahead? Sarah, can you stop sharing your screen?
Sorry, I thought it was stop sharing. There it goes. Sorry about that, guys.
There you go. Thank you.
Okay, I'll start sharing. Okay, everybody see that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, so my wife and I have our own firm in southern Iowa, just north of the Missouri border. I'm licensed in Iowa and Missouri. The first thing you'll see here is a big caveat that every state is different. So a lot of the information I have mostly relates to Iowa, but we'll talk about some of the differences and just things that you need to take a look at. So there's different laws in every state, but also every state has different forms. It's not just in relation to like their deeds look different, because some states use really flowery language that sounds like it's from the Middle Ages. Other states are very direct and simple, but also different states require different forms to convey property. So it's not just the deed. The deed is what actually conveys it, but sometimes there's like Iowa, you have to file a declaration of value that says how much you're buying it for, and it won't be recordable unless you do that, as well as a groundwater hazard statement showing if there's any hazardous materials on there. Other states, you file the deed and that's it. But that's something that certainly an attorney would be helping you with. Title insurance is different for every state. Iowa doesn't have title insurance. So we have title opinions. The attorneys are very involved in this process. And the abstract, which is the history of the property, it's a thick document, and it's continued by an abstractor and then given to the attorney. The attorney reviews that whole thing, and like Sarah was talking about, they identify any easements, any mortgages, defects in title, misspellings of names, anything like that, going back through the history of the property. And then they issue a title opinion saying, yes, you do or you don't have marketable title. So that's a big difference in Iowa and other states. Other states, you're going to have the title insurance company, and they're going to be doing the title review and say whether there's anything that needs to be fixed, and then issue that title policy. And so they might have their underwriting people doing that, and your attorney might not be involved in that process. Different taxes. Sarah mentioned, sometimes there's taxes that are left. Every state's different in how they collect taxes, mainly property taxes is what we're talking about here. So that's something to think about. Different customs, could be different things that are done in the state or even the county. And so having a local attorney is beneficial there. Just some thoughts on how to choose an attorney. Just word of mouth, the resources that are available. Oh, getting ahead of me there. Word of mouth, the internet, of course. Your county or state bar association can be helpful. I suppose the yellow pages, I don't know how many people use those anymore. And then explore their expertise. So if they have a website, or whether it's word of mouth or the bar association, whatever you're using, try to discover what their expertise is in. Sometimes people will want to use a family member that's an attorney or a friend, and they're happy to help out and they want to help out, but maybe they practice criminal law. Probably a better idea not to use them unless they have some history with it. And a lot of times you mean well, and I have family members that ask me about criminal law and I want to help them, but it's probably better if I don't. You want to understand, make sure that they understand real estate, and then more particularly farm real estate. And then if you're doing something more unique than, say, conventional agriculture, whatever that means necessarily, but like something out of the ordinary from the community standard, then you'll want to make sure that they understand those unique situations. Like we talked about, like zoning before, and how that can affect things. And then it's fine to interview your attorney. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes with real estate transactions, the bank will just say, this is the attorney we use, and that's it. And that's fine. They're probably experienced, but if you are looking for an attorney, there's nothing wrong with calling them and asking them about their experience. I don't mind when people do that. It doesn't happen a whole lot, really. But I definitely have no problem with that and encourage people to do it. A few thoughts on how to work effectively with your attorney. Get them engaged as quickly as possible. Hire them certainly before the transaction starts, because attorneys, they're going to get paid. Usually with real estate transactions, it's not a lot unless it's a very complicated thing, or there's some kind of issue that arises with title or something like that. But usually it's going to be a lot less than what you pay if you don't have an attorney at the get-go. And then there's litigation that can cost tens of thousands of dollars. And so you don't want that. Communication is obviously important. Find out the best way that they want to communicate, because attorneys that deal with real estate, like my wife exclusively deals with real estate, and she loves email because she's got closings every day, and if she was constantly taking phone calls, she wouldn't have time to do anything else. But if she gets an email, so she always encourages people to use email. So take your attorney up on that, because it can really help them out, and allow them to get everything done that they need to get done. And there's nothing wrong with asking how long it should be until you expect a response. Sometimes, especially if attorneys are doing other things other than real estate, they might have a trial that could be taking a couple of days or something. And so if you're not getting a response, talk to the office and say, can I just schedule a time to talk to them? Provide all the information you have. Don't leave anything out. Don't think, oh, this isn't important, because it might not be relevant, but let your attorney decide that. Also, let your attorney provide the legalese that everyone hates, right? Because it's there for a reason. People think, oh, this is just, family deal or whatever. Well, it's better to have it in there than not have it in there. If it's not in there and there's a problem, that's why we have litigation. And if something changes, let your attorney know as soon as possible. What to expect from your attorney. And again, this is going to depend on who else is involved in the transaction, and when your attorney is brought in. So, but in general, they should be able to explain the overall process. Now, your real estate agent is probably going to do that as well. Your lender is going to do that specifically in relation to the lending process. But your attorney should be able to provide you with a general overview of what you should expect and when. And they can be engaged in negotiating the terms if they're brought in soon enough. Drafting or reviewing the purchase agreement. So, if you don't have a realtor or you have very specific provisions, having the attorney draw up the purchase agreement certainly works. Or if you've already got a purchase agreement, having them review it. We're going to talk a lot about purchase agreements. I'm going to go through a whole one because it kind of walks everybody through the entire process. But that purchase agreement is extremely important, and very important to have everything in there that you want, especially if you have unique circumstances. At least in Iowa, your attorney is going to review the abstract and issue a title opinion, making sure you have marketable title. Again, if you're in a different state, the title insurance company may take care of that. And then reviewing the documents. So your attorney is going to provide the deeds, or possibly the title company is going to provide the deeds and any other documents that are necessary. And your attorney can review those to make sure that they are accurate and conveying what's supposed to be conveyed and by whom and to whom it's supposed to be conveyed. And then the closing statement, we'll talk about that a little more also, but they may be drafting or just reviewing the closing statement, which is at the end of the process. Closing statement's going to be signed at closing by all the parties, and it shows all of the purchase price and then all of the fees and taxes and expenses that are allocated to each party, and then the final number of what the buyer needs to bring to closing and what the seller is going to be getting at closing. The purchase agreement. So this is a binding contract, no do-overs. I've definitely had a number of situations where people have a contract, and then they say, everybody's already signed it. I had one where someone on the seller's side sold a chunk of their land, but they were keeping their house. And then they found out that they were going to put in a motocross on that land instead of farming it. And she was very upset, and she was like, I don't want that next to my house. But this was in a county without zoning. So she wanted to get out of the contract, but there was no provision in there restricting what they could do with the property. Excuse me. And so we eventually had to pay to get out of the contract, and it costed quite a bit of money to do that, tens of thousands of dollars, because they had the right to move forward with the contract, and that's what they were going to do through court. So that is a situation you want to avoid. Now, your attorney might get frustrated if you do this repeatedly, because as soon as we got out of that contract, another one was entered into without me reviewing it first, and it still did not have any restrictions on what the buyer could do. Fortunately, the next buyer did not want to put in a motocross, and everything worked out, but it was a little bit scary there for a little bit. So I've got a purchase agreement. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold, not quite there yet. The purchase agreement, we'll go through the main highlights here and kind of use it to go through the process. But the parties, this is something that's overlooked a lot of times, but it's actually really important because sometimes people will be purchasing as they're going to want it to go into their LLC, or they're going to want to set up an LLC for it to go into, and they'll just use individual names. You really need to have the correct parties on there. So if you're buying from an LLC or buying as an LLC or corporation, you want that listed. Now, you can assign it to a corporation later if you haven't gotten your entity set up yet. But if at all possible, have the correct names in there. And have both, if you're married or there's multiple buyers, have everybody's name in there. Description of the property, this seems pretty straightforward, but definitely best to use a legal description. We've had situations where it was just an address, and that's fine if you're buying a lot in town that a house is sitting on. Still not the best. But if you can use a legal description, absolutely do so. Now, sometimes it might be subject to a survey, so you're not buying the entire thing, but you're getting a survey and parceling a piece of it off. But then even in that case, it needs to say that it's going to be the legal description subject to the survey, and attach like a map or something showing exactly what's being conveyed, because there have been court cases where the legal description wasn't used and the courts have said this is too vague to be enforceable, and we're not going to do it. The price is pretty straightforward. The only thing to think about there is allocating the price between real property and personal property. And we're not talking about like if the washer and dryer goes with the house, that's fine. But if you're also purchasing any equipment, livestock, anything like that that's going with the property, you'll want to allocate that separately. Probably talk to your CPA about how that's allocated. And then the price will also be subject to adjustments and prorations depending on who's paying closing costs, what property taxes have been paid, that kind of thing. Earnest money, that's how much is put down at the beginning. The idea there is to show that the buyer is serious, as well as covering any expenses necessary if the buyer backs out, because the seller is going to start incurring expenses like abstracting and so forth, attorney fees. And so if it falls through due to the buyer's fault, then they get to keep that earnest money. Contingencies, there can be any number of contingencies, but typically, like Sarah was talking about, financing is a big one. So if you're getting financing, make sure that your purchase agreement is contingent on that financing. If you've got other property that you need to sell in order to make this one happen, because sometimes it's like dominoes, right? This person's selling their property and buying this one. A lot of times that's with houses, but if it's smaller parcels, you may be doing that here as well. So that could be one. Existing contract. So if there's a lease already in place and maybe it's too late to terminate it for that year, it's going to say, all right, you're taking this subject to the lease, and the buyer will honor that lease. Same thing with CRP contracts. If there's CRP on the ground, Conservation Reserve Program through the USDA, that's important that, at least for the seller, to make sure that the buyer is going to continue to honor that contract. Because I did have a case where a buyer bought property. It wasn't in the contract, anything about CRP. And then they found out that there was CRP and they did not want to continue that contract with the USDA. And the USDA went back to the seller and said, hey, they're not honoring this. You got to pay back all your CRP payments that we've made to you. And they had to. So that's something to include there. If there is any personal property, sometimes there's a ravine that's filled with the junk or something, or potentially hazardous materials, including a contingency that's going to be cleaned up prior to that. And oftentimes the contract will have some type of warranty saying, where the seller is warranting that there are no hazardous materials on the property or anything like that, any environmental issues.
Hey, Ed, we're gonna have we have about 3 or 4 more minutes.
Okay, all right, I'll speed up.
Okay.
All right, abstract review, we've talked about that. Making sure what's included in the property, whether there's any personal property included, the condition of the property, whether there's inspections going to be allowed or you're just buying it as is. Closing, identifying who's going to do it, when it's going to be done, where it's going to be done, and what's going to be delivered. That should all just be outlined within that. So then nobody has any questions about what's going to happen at closing. Remedies of the parties if something goes wrong, that's important to put in there. Basically, what we usually do is just say, you can see down here in 11E, they're entitled to use any remedies available, including specific performance. And so they can force, if you're buying it and the seller says no, you can sue for specific performance. If you win, most contracts have attorney fees built in, so the prevailing party gets attorney fees. But if it doesn't have that, then don't expect to get attorney fees, because most states, you don't get those unless it's in a contract or in a statute. Miscellaneous provisions, there's just all this boilerplate that goes along in every agreement. It is important, but it's often just the same for each agreement. Signatures are important. This is something that's often left out. Again, using exact names and representative capacity. So if you're selling as a trust, it needs to say that you're acting as the trustee or as president of an LLC. Same with buying. Include addresses and phone numbers. If they know what attorney they're using, that's beneficial as well. This is a copy of the closing statement. So just an example to show, there's a buyer's column and a seller's column, and it specifically states everything that's being paid by each party. And so this is something that you should expect to see probably a few days before closing, but not too far in advance, because a lot of these are moving parts. But at the end of the day, it shows exactly what each party is bringing or getting. Finally, just a few general tips to keep in mind. Not everything can be fixed. So a lot of times people think, okay, well, there's an issue that came up, whether it's with title or whatever, and we expect the attorneys to fix it. Sometimes there's just bad title and it can't be fixed without significant cost or lawsuits. And then the parties just have to come to an agreement on what they can or can't do. Also keep in mind, what you think might be a simple agreement may have complex consequences. So we get people a lot that say, well, this is a simple deal, but it quickly turns out to not be. And listen to your attorney when they want to complicate things. I know that's not what you want to do, but it can simplify things in the long run to put them in. Be flexible. Closing dates change sometimes. Keep everyone in the loop. And then there's just a few simple terms to keep in mind. A lot of people get confused about these. Title, there's not like a certificate of title. That's the deed. The title in real estate typically is the legal concept of ownership. The deed is the actual document that transfers title. And then the abstract is the written history of all of the transactions. So that's going to be a very thick document. All right. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you. We have several excellent questions. I'm going to shoot them your way, Ed, and then Sarah, there's a few for you as well. This is a question about if the property has a home, should only the farm be under the LLC and the home separate?
Yeah, potentially. That having your home in an LLC could be detrimental for certain purposes. And especially in relation to like creditors and stuff. But then having the farm in an LLC can be beneficial for, and probably lending purposes also. That Sarah might have more to say about that. But the having the farm in the LLC can be beneficial for liability purposes. I mean, your first line of defense is certainly insurance and having that covered. But if it's in an LLC, then if somebody has a claim or is hurt on the property, they're only going to be able to get after the LLC assets. And sometimes you even have two LLCs. So you might have a landowning LLC as well as a farm operations LLC to separate it further. But that's definitely something that you'd want to speak with further with your attorney.
Sarah, do you like to add something?
Yeah, so most lenders are going to have you personally sign as well. So unless at least at Compeer, and unless the LLC is completely separate, you don't use any of the income for family living, for anything other than the farm, you're going to end up personally signing on it as well. The other thing I would say is advice with this is I see a lot of farmers that start the LLC before they even have the property or have started farming. And to me, that puts the cart before the horse. Did I say that right? Yeah. And it complicates your situation. Talk to your attorney about it. We have a good ag attorney here in Pontiac who went to Drake Law School, actually. And that's one of her big things is like, everybody wants an LLC and you're part of ag, Sarah. But it's not necessary in all cases. So make sure you talk to your attorney, let them know what you're doing. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you go through a loan, a lot of lenders, and you have an LLC, a lot of lenders are going to make you co-sign on that personally.
Great, thanks. So Ed, a couple of questions for you regarding conservation easements or agricultural conservation easements on a property. Is there a concern that there could be, if there's an easement on it, does that constrain a landowner's ability to sell it? Is it an issue regarding financing? And then another part of that is how might it affect the loan? How does it impact property values? Can you talk a little bit about conservation easements and how they intersect with the purchasing process?
Yeah, so it's mostly yes to a lot of those questions. I mean, it's going to impact the value of the property and what you can do on the property, what the property value. Yes, and that's the whole idea of a conservation easement, right? Because it's saying you can't do these certain things with the property, and so whatever the value of those things is. You may be getting tax credits for or having just sold those to another entity, those rights. So you're limiting what can be done with the property, and so it's going to limit the value. So if you're buying property that is subject to an easement, you're going to want to know exactly what's allowed. You're going to want to review that easement pretty close. So a lot of easements, like in Iowa or the Midwest, conservation easements, they don't allow any farming. The idea is that we don't want this land farm. We want it in prairie or some other type of conservation. But there are certainly easements that do allow some type of agriculture, but it might be limited to certain types or certain practices. So you'll want to look very closely at that. Um, Sarah, as far as lending, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm sorry, I was typing an answer to
Oh.
Amy. What was the question?
Well, just about conservation easements, certainly Ed,
Oh,
well,
so we recently came up with, sorry, Kathy, that one came up yesterday. The Conservation Fund in Illinois has this farm fund where they're taking land that is at risk of being developed, and then they get a conservation easement on it, and they're able to sell it back to the farmer at a discount. They just had their easement removed by the USDA. And so there's a lot of things up in the air with conservation easements right now. That's something we've also discussed with Springfield, the FSA office in Springfield, about if that's going to hold up on the FSA side. It shouldn't hold anything up. The appraiser is going to know what's on there. It should show up in title as well. And we don't see an issue with it. Where there is going to be an issue with it is if you have CRP and you're purchasing it. I had a farmer that they had CRP on it, which means that was limiting their farm income that they could possibly have on it for 2 years, and they couldn't get out of it without having to pay back all the government had given to the seller. So you need to know if there's CRP on that land before you're purchasing it, because I've seen it kind of tank an FSA deal before. We ended up having to go in-house on that one.
so thank you, both of you, for those answers. There's a few more questions that came up while Sarah was presenting. Nathan, it is 1 or 2 or whatever on the hour, depending on what time zone you're at. We can continue and people are free to hang in, and we'll see if we can address those questions in the next 8 or so minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, so let's just officially close the webinar, but then everyone's going to hold on and stay on. Appreciate it from Ed and Sarah and Nathan. We're so glad you joined us. This is the third and last one. We will be sending links for the YouTubes of all of these, and we will also be asking all of our speakers to share their slide decks so we can send that separately as a good reference for everyone. Really appreciate that. We're going to have a big favor to ask of you to help us continue to get better and continue to get funding. We'll be sending a link for a survey. If you could please take the 5 or 10 minutes it takes to complete that, we would be so grateful. That would be super helpful to us. And you'll also be receiving an email eventually. Once that purchasing guide is available as a PDF, we will send an email to all registrants so you can take a look at that as well. Before we get back to the questions, Kathy, this has been a big 3-session series, and we did the guide. Any final thoughts that you want to share with our watchers?
Well, I'm really thrilled that people have hung in for all of these 3, and I'm glad that we're making them available. Those of you in New England probably know that Land for Good does do direct support of farmers looking to access land. We have a field agent in each New England state. We also have several publications that have been mentioned, such as Farming Together, Land Access Methods, social justice actions that landowners can take. So I encourage you to check us out, whether you're in New England or beyond. And yeah, keep your eyes open for the guide, because we dive into a lot of the questions in more detail, such as easements and lease to own and so on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. It's been a delight. And I just would offer my own small piece of advice. I heard somewhere that there's just-in-time learning and just-in-case learning. And just-in-case learning is you learn something just because it might come up at some point. Just-in-time learning is like, all right, I need to put together this IKEA bookcase, and I have no idea how to do it. And so you look at the manuals, you look at YouTubes. I would encourage people to use both. I think the just-in-case learning, like skimming over a guide, watching these webinars, far before you actually look for farmland, can actually help you figure out what other information or things you need. And then once you come up against particular topics, just-in-time learning by talking to experts like Kathy and Sarah and Ed and others, and looking at YouTubes and reading the guide, that can help you be really a wise consumer of services and a wise actor in your farmland purchase activities. Illinois FarmLink, we also offer free services. Encourage you to reach out to us. You can go to illinoisfarmlink.org. We offer a lot of free services. And you can also find other FarmLink programs in the country through the American Farmland Trust Illinois FarmLink Finder. And with that, let's get back to the questions. If you are leaving, thank you so much for being part of it. Kathy, do you want to keep moderating the questions?
Sure, let's try this one that just came in. This is for you, Sarah, but Ed, I think you might weigh in as well. Again, on the topic of easements, if there's a mortgage on the land at a value of, let's say, 400,000, and you place an easement on it after the purchase, right? How does that affect the loan as it theoretically decreases the value of the property? The questioner says the buyer would be upside down as I see it. Are they correct?
It depends. It depends on that appraisal, right? Let me put it to you this way. If you already closed on your loan and you're paying your payments on time and you get some sort of conservation easement on it, I'm not going to know. If something happens where you're not paying the loan, that's where it's going to come into problems, right? Somebody asked what CRP is. It's Conservation Reserve Program. I can never remember the R. That is where you can't really farm the ground. You have to put it in some sort of crop or natural state, and you can, I don't know, I don't even know if you can graze it. You can't really do much with it at all. You can't farm it. So if you're a farmer and you're going to the FSA and a majority of your farm income has to pay for the majority of the loan payment, and there's CRP on the ground, you have a problem because your farm income is not paying for the payment. Your CRP might help with the payment, but you can't farm it, and that's where it can come into problem. But going back to these easements, and maybe Land for Good has more experience with this than we do, but as a lender, if you're paying your loan payments on time, we're not going to do an appraisal every year, every 5 years on that. But I would be honest with your loan officer and take it on a case-by-case basis on that.
Sarah?
So we had a little bit of, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask if conveyance of an easement could potentially trigger a would that be considered a transfer if there's a due on transfer clause? I mean, I know the lender's probably not going to want to do that. I mean, they're going to want to continue getting, but is that something? I mean, obviously they need to talk to you guys before conveying interest, I would think.
The FSA is one thing. If you do anything and there's an FSA mortgage on it, that triggers whole other things, right? If you have a lender such as myself on it and the purpose of the ground has changed, we finance investor farmland too. If you're buying a farm to rent it out, it's fine. If you do, if you're putting an easement on there to put up a wind tower and they need an easement to get to the wind tower, that's something you do need to tell us, and we kind of adjust with, and we have to work with the contracts, and we're facing that a lot in Central Illinois. I would tell your lender and be honest with them. If it's going to affect you repaying your loan, that's where it's going to be an issue. But if you have anybody who needs access to it and you have a mortgage on it, you're going to have to get our permission to do it, essentially. But as a lender perspective, let's say you have an off-farm job that really is strong income and repaying that loan is not an issue. Usually we're okay with the easements. If it's something that's really going to affect the value of the collateral, case-by-case basis, you need to talk to your lender. The first C of the 5 C's of credit is character, and communication is in character. So talk to your lender ahead of time, because that's something I would run by our team that handles the mortgage and the easements on that stuff, and the appraisers. I would need to get their viewpoint on it. But if I had somebody that was going to put a wind tower on it, those are really, there's a lot of them in Central Illinois right now, and probably in Iowa too. And they take a little bit of time, and we always have to sign off on them and everything. So somehow we're going to find out. We do find out. But again, if it were me and you're paying your payments, but if it reduces your value a lot, I think you need to be upfront with your lender on that one, a lot, for sure.
Okay, so I'll put in a couple more questions. We are running out of time. And just to be clear, the kind of easements I believe people are asking about
Mhm.
conservation easements which remove the development rights, not an access easement, as in permission to cross the land. So here's a quick one for you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Somebody wants to be reminded the name of the pre-approval letter that was the equivalent that you mentioned by Compeer.
We
Maybe
do
just
what we
put
call
that-
pre-qualifications, and I'm going to be honest, there's nothing official about them. This is really a letter that if you read it, basically says we have an exit strategy on it. But the reason we do them, and not every loan officer will do them, but the reason our team will do them is because, you know, a lot of times real estate agents, especially up in the Chicagoland area, they won't even talk to you if you haven't gone through a lender, or if a lender hasn't looked at it. So it is not a pre-approval. There's a ton of asterisks in there that can say we approve up to X amount, pending FSA financing, pending approval, pending the finances don't change. There's a lot of, you know, contingencies in that. On the residential side, a pre-approval is a pre-approval. That's what you're approved for. At least at Compeer, not every loan officer will do them, and our team does them. But I'm going to be honest, if Ed looked at it, he said there's a lot of exits for the lender on this one, but it helps people get their foot in the door with real estate agents if they know that you've already talked to a lender.
Okay, Nathan, should we try for one more or call it a day?
One more.
All right, so this, I'm going to combine a couple of questions. This is about farming experience as to qualify for a loan.
Mhm.
Sarah, for you, if a couple is applying, do they both need farm experience, part A, and part B, does farm management experience or training count toward the checking off that box?
So for the FSA, it depends. It depends on which state you're in, depends on the loan officer. In Illinois, sometimes if you've got an ag degree, they count that as one. If you've worked at somewhere like we've got Caterpillar here in Peoria, sometimes they might count that as two. If you've managed people, if you worked for another farmer, as long as you were making some of the decisions, then that might count as three. They really like to see that you have managed your own farm and that you have experience and that you've had skin in the game before. Managing somebody else's farm is different. I would say if you're a farm manager and you're going for that FSA loan, and you don't have like an actual Schedule F or haven't had income from farming, I think that puts you ahead of a lot of the other borderline ones. But again, it depends on the loan officer and if they're going to take you. The safest route you can go is to have 3 years of Schedule Fs.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm not sure if it depends is people's worst answer or favorite answer, but we hear it all.
It depends.
And
Talk to
just
loan
in
officer.
closing, Paul, one of our participants, noted that most ag lenders are easier to work with on this process than mainstream or conventional lenders. And I think that a lot of people will verify that. All right, Nathan, I'll turn it back to you as we close out.
All right. I'm sure most people have ducked off, but we're so glad for that. Those of you who did stick around did. Thank you so much for the nice comments we've seen. I just saw this. Thank you. The best 4.5 hours I've spent. That's a very high praise.
That's a high bar.
But we're especially grateful today for Ed, Sarah, and Nathan for taking time. It was very evident that all of you spent time thinking about this and put a lot of thought into what you shared, and that you care a lot about the success of people who want to farm. Grateful, very grateful for that. Kathy, thank you so much for all of your work and our partnership on this. All the best to everyone in your farm search. Take care.